So let's get started then. Thank you for joining today's webinar, 7 Steps to Data Resilience in a Highly Regulated World. Before we jump into today's presentation and I hand you over to our lovely speakers, I just have a bit of housekeeping to run through. So next screen, please. Yeah. Ultimately, the goal of today is to help you identify information security risks within your organization and give you a step-by-step process to help you boost data resilience and protect against data breaches. Feel free to screenshot any slides that you think are relevant, but that said, we will be recording the webinar and I will be sending out a link to the webinar tomorrow morning, so keep an eye out for that. So onto the team then. I'm Paige, I'm the marketing manager in the UK. With me today, I have Hilton Stewart, Echo's Information Security Director, and our main speaker, Declan Timmins, Head of Governance, Risk and Compliance at Ward Solutions, which is an Echo company, and I'm sure many of you joining us from Ireland today already know about Ward. As always, we invite your comments and questions throughout the webinar. We will take a couple of pauses to answer questions throughout the webinar, and any that we don't get to, we'll answer at the end. So if you do have any questions, just pop them into the chat box on your screen. The final thing to say is that this is actually going to be a 2-part webinar. So this part focuses on data governance, and it's specifically at the business continuity and planning side of things, whilst the second part will dive more into how managed SIEM and SOC solutions can help fortify your defenses. So keep an eye out for that, and we look forward to bringing that to you in the next couple of weeks. Before I hand over to Declan to kick us off, we'd actually like to get started with a quick poll. So if you wouldn't mind giving us your answers, the question is, do you feel you have a robust response plan in place should you experience a data breach? I'll give you a couple of seconds to answer that poll. Can't see if any answers are coming in yet. Okay, Declan, can you see those answers?
I can indeed. Thanks for the great introduction, Paige. Welcome everybody to the webinar. Hopefully you'll gain some experience of the governance and trying to understand the governance of getting to a data resilient backup solution. Looking at those figures there, 99%, sorry, I missed the figures there again. 29% said yes, you do have a robust plan. 71% don't. You know, that's a bit concerning, but it probably is similar to what we've seen in the marketplace. I think the previous slide there. Yeah. So, in a recent infrastructure modernization report conducted by Echo in 2022, we're looking at 1 in 4 C leadership feel to have a good handle under cybersecurity. You know, so that's only like 25%. You know, have a good handle. 79% of decision makers are concerned about their cybersecurity of their infrastructure, which is, you know, daunting. And then 38% have a robust response plan in place. So it's not too far ahead of where we see today and the participants today. Next slide. So the agenda today, you know, what is data resilience? We're trying to understand what data resilience is all about. What does a data breach look like, a typical data breach, and then just work through the 7 steps of data resilience. So data resilience. So data, absolutely every single business, data is without doubt the most important corporate asset. You know, you can have the best systems, you have the best applications, the best technology there, but without the data to support that business, you know, it's of no value at all. And loss of that data is a huge problem for the business. You know, so if you're in a banking situation and you lose all the transactions, if you're, you know, working with customers, or you lost all their orders, or you lost what those vendors, you know, are supplying to you, or your customers are need to pay to you, you know, you're in a real trouble. So data resilience is really all about the ability of any data storage function to efficiently recover data which is corrupted or lost as a result of service disruptions, equipment failure, or more typically these days, you know, ransomware or cyber attacks. You know, so there's huge upsurge in cyber attacks. The HSE in Ireland is one of the big ones that, you know, comes to the fore for ourselves. And for power failures and, you know, other actions as well that, you know, you might lose data for. Next slide. And then, you know, looking at a ransomware attack, the typical kind of scenario attack vector for ransomware attack is starting off with a phishing email. Typically, you know, that an attack vector we see a lot of. And then from that phishing email to a help desk user, let's say, the bad actor will execute software on that individual's laptop, so that'll give them access to that laptop and gain access to knowledge on that laptop. What's your experience with that, Hilton?
I think it's interesting to note that generally most data breaches statistically tend to start with phishing emails. I think email remains one of the biggest ingress points or attack surfaces for data breaches in general. And although I think a lot of people tend to assume that executing bad software on company-owned devices is not possible when there are antivirus solutions in play, there are actually ways around those kind of protections as well, which is why it's always very important to prepare for those eventualities.
Yeah, absolutely. And, there are some solutions as well to pick up those activities on a laptop, so that might be useful. And also, the obvious mitigation from the human interaction is security awareness training ongoing for your staff, but, the bad actors as well are getting better all the time at crafting these phishing emails to make it look really, really believable, let's say, to your end users. So it's difficult sometimes to pick up on those phishing emails, with the best will in the world, let's say.
Yes.
But then I suppose once they get access to that laptop, the key thing they're trying to get from that laptop is as much information as possible about the environment, the users, user accounts, credentials, anything that's of value to understand your network and understand how it's put together, what access they can get. So obviously, if they're going to take all those credentials and passwords from that user account and from that user laptop and any other devices they can connect to, and they could go in and analyze that information and try gain more and more information sitting there in the background for a period of time to understand, and gain as much knowledge about your environment as possible. So then using that knowledge and using some of those credentials, they might start attacking or connecting to some servers over that machine user and installing remote management software. And obviously, at that point, they're on your network, they're working laterally across your network and trying to escalate their privilege to get admin onto your environment, to get more access and more levels of access and different areas of your network. And also, they're going to move on to scan your network to try understand what the valuable assets that you have, where are the big databases, what's the more important systems that they'd like to attack, because, they want to find your mission critical system because they're the ones that you're going to pay for. So, attacking a HR system, if it's of no value to the business, whereas, your CRM or your ERP solution or something like that might be a far more valuable attack vector. So once they've identified, the key areas that they'd like to attack and the key data, they're going to install remote software on that device and then start to exfiltrate data and encrypt the machine. So typically ransomware these days has two parts to it. One is to exfiltrate some data from that device and from your environment. And secondly is to encrypt your machines and to disallow your access to the environment. So any thoughts on that, Hilton?
I think your last point there about there being two parts to that last stage about the exfiltration of data and the encryption of the machine is very important. When a lot of people think of ransomware, they typically think, they lose data via the encryption of servers and data locally. Now, that's certainly a very valid part of a ransomware attack that can be devastating to most businesses. But the second part is that exfiltration of data, which most of the time, even if you recover from a successful ransomware attack, that data is that being exfiltrated is now available or sold on the dark web, for example, or potentially even used to further blackmail the business. So there's always those two parts to a ransomware attack to bear in mind.
Yeah, absolutely. And as Hilton said, the data is available on the dark web. Other actors might use that data as information gathered about your environment to attack you again. There might be credentials in there. You haven't changed those credentials or whatever it might be in that period. But also if it's personal data and from a regulatory point of view, it's a GDPR compliance, you need to identify what that data is. You need to tell the individuals who are involved. Those individuals can mitigate or can litigate in court, to fine the company. So you can be found, you have to report the data breach to the Data Protection Commissioner, and then if you end up in court with litigation from that group of people who are exfiltrated data, then it's 60K, I think, is the max fine per user. 100 million or a million users is 60K a piece, like is a lot of money, and a lot of big organizations are worried about that piece more than the typical fine that you get from a GDPR breach.
Exactly.
Next slide. Yeah, so in this case, the attack timeline, the first kind of couple of actions were done about 3 weeks before the attack. And that could be 3 weeks, it could be 3 months, it could be 3 years, you know, it depends. These individuals could be sitting on your network for quite a while, you know, and if you don't have good detection facilities and you're not monitoring your network quite well, you know, there's a difficulty in picking up that action and the actions of those intruders. Then typically during business hours, the lateral movement piece takes place. That's because they're using valid credentials, so you're not going to be picked up by your detection facilities. They're using those during daytime, so it doesn't look unusual that somebody's logging in at 10 o'clock at night and there's a lot of activity going on. So, you know, the activity is masked about your normal activity during the day. And then typically on a Thursday, Friday, Saturday evening is some time where you're not going to have support. You're not going to have somebody to help you, and they can kick off that. So they're going to press the big button and start encrypting late at night, you know, on a Thursday, Friday evening, on a Saturday morning or something like that. So they're expecting that you won't have support for a couple of days, and you know their work will be done by the time somebody gets in there to support you.
And it's very important to consider when doing incident planning, to account for the fact that most of those active attacks tend to take place at the most inconvenient time. You know, most incident response plans or data resiliency plans will put things in place during business hours, but often don't consider out of hours issues.
Okay, yeah, it's very, very important. And then I suppose looking onto the next piece, so how does incident response benefit your data resilience? You know, so you know, if you have a good, robust BCP plan, a disaster recovery plan, and an incident response plan, you're going to understand the priorities of the business. So you've identified, agreed, approved. Everybody knows what's mission critical to this business, and that's the priority for rebuild. So the last thing you want to be doing is on the day that you need to rebuild or recover from a ransomware attack, to start discussing what's important and what's the sequence of recovery. Backup recovery testing, obviously, if you do test your backups, will result in a more efficient return to business as usual, even with traditional backup solutions. You know, the more frequent you test, the better. You know, you can focus those tests just on the mission critical functions. So you can say this business function is reliant on this piece of hardware, so let's test that in this iteration of the testing. And then the availability of core data is protected, so you're making sure you've protected data, and multiple levels of backup for rollback to pre-attack, which is really important, that you have lots of levels of backup that you can roll back to.
Okay, so I'm going to jump in here. Before we go to the next section, we've had a couple of questions that have come in via the chat. So Declan, I'll come to you first. What's a practical approach to developing a BCP plan, and how do we get buy-in from key stakeholders?
Well, I suppose that BCP planning is always difficult, and in some sense, most IT professionals who are working in organizations probably have a fair handle on what the business expectations are and what's mission critical to the business, and could probably have an initial stab at what's the 10 most critical functions of the business. But that's fine on its own, and maybe that's a good starting point if you can't get that cultural buy-in and get the other people on board, and you can at least have something to start with. But typically, the ideal solution is to go to the business, go to all the business leaders in the different departments, bring them all together, educate them about what BCP is all about and why it's so important, and how it ties into DR plan, how it ties into an incident response and your backups and all the rest. So it's critical to the business. Try to get buy-in from them and get at least a good understanding of what you're trying to achieve. And then in each department, go to each department head and determine what's mission critical for that department. So business continuity, in some sense, may not rely on technology. So it might be a case that, you've got to recover back to pen and paper for a period of time until technology can catch up, let's say. So, it depends on the level of criticality of that function. But if you're with each business leader or head of department and you understand what is critical in that department, then you can consolidate all them into one list, bring all those business leaders back together again, and have a frank discussion about what's important to the business. Sometimes there's pushback. There's often, different heads of department, feel that their piece of the business is really important and it's absolutely critical, it has to be done. But, you have to get a good overall cultural understanding and agreement of everybody, because then you've got buy-in to what exactly you need to recover. And that's crucial when you have an incident recovery post ransomware. because there's no arguments going on about, somebody coming to you and say, get my system up and run quicker because, I feel I need to get addressed first in line, because the agreement is there. The person recovering has the list of systems and the sequence of which they need to recover. They're not going to be distracted by people coming to them and try to get systems that are further down the list up first.
Yeah, thanks, absolutely. It's so important to create that kind of security first culture, isn't it? And get that buy-in. So
absolutely,
Yeah. Another question here. So Hilton, I'll come to you next. What's the typical downtime for organizations that experience a data breach?
So it's an interesting question, that, because it very much depends on the type of data breach or data resiliency attack that a business suffers. For example, if it's a leakage of sensitive data, in terms of a data breach, there can actually be no notable downtime of a business's systems. You carry on with operation as usual until you're aware of what's transpired. However, with things like ransomware and malicious attacks, generally you'd be expecting days to weeks of downtime of critical systems. It can take business operations offline completely for weeks at a time. Some businesses never fully recover from very serious ransomware or malicious attacks, but generally there's a pretty direct correlation between how prepared you are and how detailed your BCP plan is, for example, or your recovery plan, and how long your outage lasts for.
Okay, brilliant. Thanks, Hilton. So I have just seen another question in, but we'll come back to that at the end. And just a reminder to everyone, put your questions into the chat box, and yeah, we'll answer them at the end. So Declan, Hilton, back to you.
Thank you. And I suppose before we jump in here, we should run another poll there. So I'd like to ask, have you got a BCP plan that's tested and up to date? So it's up to date and it's tested or recently tested. Give me a few seconds to jump in there. So 100% said no. It's not unusual either, I suppose, so absolutely business continuity and, disaster recovery and all those kind of things, they're brilliant. They're great to have in place, but, they are resource intensive, and I absolutely appreciate that. I know people are busy out there. I know there's lots of, of stuff going on in a business, and it's one of the things you'd love to have in place, but you don't get to, and you keep putting it on the long finger until the day that you have an attack. So, it's really important to hive off some time to do that to a certain level across the year where you can. But, equally, I understand that it's difficult to get that. And I suppose that's an area that we can help in some way. My team do this for people quite a lot, and we can support you in trying to get that plan together, get that testing schedule in place. I suppose then jumping into step one, visibility and transparency, this is what I said, business continuity plan, absolutely crucial at the start of the business continuity plan, that you understand the business operation. How my business works, how we make money, how we interact with our clients and our vendors, the regulatory environment in which we sit. So, what regulations we need to abide by, central bank guidelines, HIPAA, GDPR, PCI, all the common requirements from regulatory. And then what's the downside of breaching that compliance requirement? Are we going to get fined? Do I need to notify somebody? So there are issues for the business by being non-compliant for some of these regulatory requirements. So having understood the business, then again, working with the key business holders to understand the critical business functions. So what's really, really important? What's a showstopper for this business? Where do we make our money, and what business function will prevent us from making that money? So you really need to understand exactly what they are. You need to prioritize them to make sure that they're the right sequence of recovery. And in some senses, there might be dependencies. So you might say X system is number one on that priority list, but in actual fact, it has a dependency on system 3. So that needs to be brought up pretty quick as well, or at the same time, so we can have simultaneous systems coming up. But having a good understanding of how it all works and how the business works is really critical. So it's not just about technology, it's not just about IT, it's not just about systems and backups, it's understanding what you need as a business and the business pushing this. And then if you look at the business critical functions, understanding the infrastructure and the applications that support them, so making sure that you can rebuild those infrastructures and have access to those applications that are in those backups that you might put in place. And then the data, absolutely, the data supports those critical business functions. Key again, that's prioritized data. That's the mission critical function data, let's say, for those prioritized functions. So you need to understand that data, where it is, how it's protected, how you can recover it back, how quickly you can recover it back.
Just sort of two thoughts on visibility specifically on those comments. You can't protect what you don't know you have, especially when it comes to data and systems. And this is specifically true of things like data. But once a specific set of data is deleted or encrypted, it's a bit too late to try and figure out what that data was actually used for, what its dependency is, which is why planning and inventory of data is so important on that. And also, sort of Declan's point from earlier in the presentation about priorities of various business systems is so often we see in these sort of intense incidents and recovery type processes where everybody is in a high stress situation, and suddenly every element of the business is the most important, and the poor people that are trying to do incident response at this time are generally, in the absence of a well thought out and tested plan, are generally now responding to whichever business unit is shouting the loudest to get their data restored, which can hinder recovery operations quite extensively.
Absolutely, yeah. And it's something we've come across as well in incident response management we've done for different clients. Getting distracted by other departments or other heads of departments and the strongest individuals within an organization is difficult. Without that prioritized kind of dedicated list that we've already agreed and approved up front, you can't fight back. You can't decide, particularly as a third party vendor, you can't decide what the priorities are. You can just react to the business and the way the business is pushing, which is not the correct way to do it. So I suppose then from a DR point of view, so you've got your business continuity plan. The two things you want from a business continuity plan are some of the things you want is the impact. So you've decided what your critical business functions are. You've prioritized them based on their impact, so how impactful they are to the business. And then the two things you want to know is how much data can you lose and you can tolerate to lose without a huge impact for that business function. And then what's the recovery time objective? So how fast do I need that function back up and running without it affecting the business? So the effect or the impact on the business is the critical thing. So if it's a huge effect, you might not be allowed to have any downtime. And in some regulatory environments, it might not be possible to have any downtime for an individual business function. So determining those is absolutely key, because that's going to educate your IT team to try put together a plan which will bring those systems back online as quickly as the business needs them, and it will make sure that the data loss is restricted to that amount of time. So that might be synchronous backups all the time because you can't lose any data, or it could be we can lose an hour of data or a day of data. The more online 24/7 365 a system needs to be that we can't have failover is more expensive to replicate. So you've got to have two systems running all the time and just fail over to the second system. The same with backups. If you need synchronous backups all the time, they're going to be more expensive than backups where you can take a backup solution, every hour or day. So it's important to get that right as well. And then, having an incident response procedure, absolutely, making sure you've got your business continuity plan, you've got your DR plan, you know what the mission critical functions are, you know what the business is expecting from you from a recovery time objective, and recovery point objective. And then the incident response plan should tie into that, so you should be looking at your incident response plan. Within that, you have that priority of business function that you need to bring back up online. You have the recovery times that are expected of you and the recovery points that are expected from a data point of view. And you need to pull all those together into your incident response plan and have that in the back of your mind when you're trying to fight this incident and work through the incident, let's say. But I suppose not a lot of organizations as well have an incident response plan that ties those three things together. That's very unusual that might happen. That's an additional step in the process, let's say, and it's something that it's good to address if you can, but typically organizations didn't get to that. And then one of the key things in trying to recover from an incident is having an incident containment plan up front. So as I said, the bad actors typically these days, they've done a lot of pre-planning, they've done a lot of stealthy movement across your network, and they wait to the most inopportune time to push the button. When they push the button, typically it's almost, a fait accompli that you're going to be compromised across your whole network. But there may be some small element of you being able to protect some systems. But if you have limited time, you need to understand which systems to go to first. So which ones do I need to protect? Which systems are key to me? Do I need to go to my backups to protect them to make sure that they're offline as quickly as possible? Secondly, do I need to go to my mission critical application and see if that's been affected and let's shut that down? But to be able to do that, you need to understand your network and understand your environment, understand the network segmentation points or choke points. And then when you have that understanding, and you need someone quite technical to drive that, then you need to test that. If I shut down this firewall rule, what does that mean? Does that take that critical system offline? Does that effective in trying to protect it? And then even when you have that level of knowledge, you also need to have pre-approval, because you can't be ringing somebody on Saturday night at 10 o'clock as an engineer and saying, I need to change the firewall rules, guys, can you give me approval? So there's no time for that. So you need to have pre-approval for this plan. You need to have the tech guy there with the experience to be able to do it, but you also have to have the credentials to be able to get access to the environment and access to all these different areas of the environment to be able to make those changes. And then having put together that plan, there is an impact on the business. So the business need to understand, what's going on here. Like, so if I shut down a certain firewall rule, you're not going to have these business functions until this comes back up and running. I need to understand that and be okay with that, because we're trying to fight this incident and this ransomware attack. So it's really important to have a robust containment plan if you can, and you've got the time to do it. It's a useful thing to have as part of your incident response, and it's really useful to have it tested and understood by the people who need to implement it, and that pre-approval, I suppose, is important. And then I suppose once that incident response plan is in place, one of the key things that our customers come to us with is, a request to do a scenario-based tabletop exercise. Absolutely, really important. If you haven't had an incident in the past and you haven't fought through an incident of ransomware or any sort of a cyber attack, it's really important to do a tabletop exercise, because it's a practical walkthrough of the plan that you put in place. So the plan might look brilliant for you internally reading it, but when you get a third party to come in and to start questioning pieces of it, you make a lot of assumptions in the plan, that, okay, I'll go here and I'll shut down this part of the network, but actual fact, you might not have the credentials to get there, or you might have the approval to get there. Or as you walk through the plan, quite often you'll pick up on elements of gaps that are there. Let's say, an incident is reported to the help desk user, but the help desk user doesn't know what to do. Who do I contact? And when I see this on my screen, do I ring somebody? Do I ring IT? Do I ring somebody else? And there's time wasted there, which is, in a ransomware attack, time is critical. It's really time critical these days. The quicker you can respond, the quicker you can, hone your response skills, let's say, to that, the better. And also the incident response team change over time. So, just doing it once, is of no benefit if half the team weren't on the last one. And it's a good thing as well to have new people on the incident response team, because they bring another view onto that. There might be things that you'd missed, and when you run through it again, so actually, this is a good approach. We'll add that to the plan and improve the plan as we go.
Exactly, and I think just to highlight again that and to tie it into a point you made earlier, Declan, about a specific example of credentials, is when testing an incident response plan, or a specific engineer, for example, may know that they do process A, B, and C, which involves getting access to system X, for example, but they know they do that all the time, so they don't delve deeper into the plan. But when you have an external person running through a tabletop simulation, for example, you call out those specific steps to say, okay, where are the credentials that you have access to? And for example, the engineer, and I've seen this happen before in situations where the engineer goes, okay, I go here and I get the credentials for, oh wait, hang on, we don't have access to those credentials, for example. And exactly as Declan says, and that can derail your entire incident response plan, where even minutes are critical when it comes to shutting down specific areas of the network. So test these with people that are not involved in the processes directly, because they're more likely to pick up knowledge gaps that are sort of gray areas or blind spots.
Absolutely. makes all the sense, and a really popular service, I suppose, the scenario-based tabletop exercise, and something you can run for yourselves. You know, like you can do it internally. You can run it at different levels. You can run it for your board, your senior management, your heads of departments usually get involved. You know, some of your key like leadership on the HR, legal, and all the rest. But equally, you can move it down to the tech team and understand the tech team. You know, when you go say, I'll rebuild X server. You know, how practically are you going to do that? So, you know, it's often when you question what's written on paper that you discover, well, actually, that doesn't make any sense at all. I can't do that, or I don't have the ability or the knowledge to do that, or I don't have the credentials to do it, or the technology or the software or technology to do it. So I suppose the key point of all this is really that we're looking at the governance piece. So instead of you just jumping out and buying a data resilient backup solution, and there's many of them out there from different vendors and they've all different capabilities, you know, don't just jump in and do that without understanding the data that you need to protect and the recovery times and recovery points that you need to make from this solution. So this solution is going to be part of your recovery process if you had a breach, and it needs to deliver the timings, the recovery times that the business are expecting. You know, so if the business wanted something up within an hour, and currently you can't achieve that with your current backup solution, well, then you might need to look at these resilient backup solutions, because they're, you know, far slicker and being able to recover your environment, let's say. So some of the common kind of capabilities of that high level of resilient solutions these days is some level of identity and administrative security. So obviously, you know, if you have a backup solution for your core key data, you know, you want to make sure it's protected. You want to have multi-factor on there. You want to make sure that only a certain level of access can get access to those backups, and are protected from the bad actors. Quite often, a lot of them have artificial intelligence running to identify and monitor, you know, stuff that's going on in your backup, ransomware in there, some executables kicking off, you know, something unusual in your backups that shouldn't be doing. So you don't want to have, you know, have your backup that you're reliant on breached in itself. But also, you know, some of those solutions have deduplication, which, you know, reduce the number of files, find duplicate files and folders and stuff across that backups that you've made, so that you're not using all that backup capacity wasted by having duplicate files. And then every backup solution, obviously, you can have good encryption, so at rest and in transit, so making sure that that's there. Multiple layers of backups, so making sure, you know, you have granularity and you can move across the different backups that are there and recover to any time or date, you know, pre-attack. And then having an air gap solution and isolation, obviously, you know, you want to make sure that those backups are protected and absolutely protected. In the past, you would have done that by, you know, putting the data on tape, getting a courier to bring it off to a data center somewhere, keeping it in a nice environment in the data center. And then at some stage, when you had to pull that back, you can send the courier back out to collect the tape. Hopefully it still hasn't deteriorated environmentally when you get there. Bring it back in. Hopefully you have a tape drive that you can run that backup on. It takes time to mount that backup again. You know, so to the past it was pretty slow to try to get backups off the media that they had. In these solutions, they're connected, but by being connected, you know, they're at risk. So making sure that air gap and isolation is available there is really important, and that's robust, that it can't be attacked by the ransomware. And then some solutions have automation and orchestration. So again, you know, it depends on how quickly you need to recover. This thing, you know, automated recovery of certain devices or certain environments, you know, certain VMs might pull up and you can just push a button to recover each of these environments and the data that are included in it. So, you know, some level of data is useful if you need it, you know, if you need that level of speed to get you up and running. Rapid recovery, you know, the more rapid recovery, the better. You know, if you can beat the RTO and RPO times of the business, absolutely, you're doing a great job. You know, it has a cost, but, you know, the business will be happy that they can get their systems or have their systems available constantly, and you can continue making money. And then self-service data access, you know, some portal that you can get in, access yourself into this data. So if you need to recover specific files or folders, you know, you'll always go into your backups to try recover something that's corrupted during the normal course of business. So it's useful to be able to get in there and pull out some file if you need be. And then quite often in huge data pools, you know, where you're backing up this data, you'll see some unstructured data. So, you know, you don't really know what it is. So it's useful if this solution has some sort of metadata management that identifies what this data is about and what it's for and where it sits in your backup.
I think just to call out one specific point of all of the very important points there in relation to air gapping is ransomware now, we are seeing ransomwares that's specifically designed to target backups. They're no longer just ransomware that will encrypt your systems. There's now actually ransomware out there that specifically goes after backups. So air gapping is even more important than it used to be. And exactly as Declan says before, tapes is just no longer able to keep up with the speed of recovery for the size of what most businesses need to be restoring in the event of a disaster.
Yeah, absolutely. Like businesses have grown in complexity. They're all online. Technology has taken over everything. So and it's really good that we can create these huge data pools and we can analyze that data to spend or sell more of our products. So there's more and more data being collected and maintained and managed and analyzed, and that plays into the business success. But equally, that's a huge risk and a huge job for somebody who needs to recover all that data and understand it. So the first stage and the kind of focus that we're trying to say here is you need to understand the data. There's no point in backing up data that's of no benefit to the business, and it's not mission critical to the business. So you need to understand what's important and get that into a situation where you can get it back up and running quite quickly. And then I suppose in any situation or any process or any procedure and anything we've got to do with information technology, always management review to remain effective. We've seen today like that nobody has a BCP plan that's tested and up and running, that's available on the webinar. And that's typically, like the 50-60% of business probably don't have a decent BCP plan that you could rely on. There is, if you can't rely on, you don't trust the plan, that's difficult, because when you have a problem, then you're going to second guess the plan and say, this is really the way we should be recovering. So having the plan, having it tested is really important. It does absolutely take time. I completely understand that, but review as frequently as you feel is appropriate to the business. Typically industry standard to say at least once a year. Once a year is probably a long time in business. The business's priorities have changed. Certain systems have gone offline. You've changed some of the technology. So it's really difficult to try to recover on a poor BCP plan and poor disaster recovery plan. And then I suppose just in summary, and I'll just flick through these quite quickly. So, we started off with visibility and transparency, understand your environment, understand the business environment and mission critical functions within that business. Aligning your disaster recovery plan with your BCP. So, you need to understand what the business is. It changes all over time. You need to change your DR plan with that BCP plan change. And also you need to change your technologies. And then create an incident response procedure, absolutely core. Make sure it's being tested. Make sure you do tabletop exercises. Part of that will have an instant containment plan. If you can do that, it'd be brilliant, because it'll really help in the incident response and have an idea and give you a better kind of insight into how your network works and what are the choke points on it. So, in day to day, it's useful anyway, because your network architect will understand better how the system is put together. And then pull in any lessons learned from any tabletop exercise or any tests of your BCP is really useful. And then having understood the whole governance, understand your data, understand your business, understand how it works, then select the backup solution that's fit for purpose for you. So there are, as I said, lots of solutions out there. Pick the one that makes sense to you, that fits in with your BCP plan, your DR, and your incident response. Make sure it works for you. And then management review. Have a look at it every now as frequently as you can, as your resources allow.
Brilliant. Thank you both. A couple more questions that have come in. So the first one then, what is the starting point you would recommend within an incident containment plan? Is it the backups, or what element have you found is most important?
It varies from environment to environment, but like I suppose backups, absolutely. I would, if I've had 2 people development team, I'd send somebody straight away to try secure the backups and make sure that we're okay with backups. But equally, I'd look at that priorities from the business, from those key business systems, and I start at number 1 and say, can we secure that? the one that's going to have the most impact for the business, I suppose, and making sure, you know, we can at least secure it or stop it from being further infected. It might save some of the data that's there, you know, so you mightn't get a full containment, let's say, but as good as possible is good. Some environments, people would shut down everything, just completely shut the whole thing down and disconnect from the internet, shut all systems down, and then start, you know, trying to understand the extent of the attack by bringing different servers up into a dirty network and seeing, you know, running something like an EDR solution to understand if there's some malicious code there. You know, if it's malicious code there, let's segment that away, and then, you know, look to try find the ones that haven't been attacked and put them into a clean part of the network. So you have some of your work is already done, and monitor them, obviously make sure there's something running on them that will identify if code is kicking off. And then you then work through that, you know, list everything that's been attacked, understand the impact of that. So which of these systems that impact on the business most, and then focus on them to recover.
Okay, thanks, Declan. Okay, another one here, Hilton, I'll come to you for this one. How common would it be for breaches to stem from a social media platform?
Interesting question. So generally, things like social media platforms would be not the direct source of a breach, you know, in terms of specific communication or direct access. What social media platforms are generally used for is, I suppose, call them an enabler or an information source. So malicious actors would normally go to social media platforms to look up information on employees as a source of a phishing attack, for example, to potentially look for, here we're talking about sort of personal social media platforms like Facebook and the likes, to look for information that could be used to answer security questions, you know, things like date of birth, maiden name, favorite pet's name, street you were born on, all of those sort of classic pieces of information about people. So generally, social media platforms, no, are not the direct source of data breaches or attacks, but they are most certainly where most malicious actors will go to scrape information about people, whether it be to pose as an employee. So we see this quite a lot in business email compromise, sort of CEO fraud type, senior management breaches and phishing campaigns. And even for, say, your average staff in the accounts department, for example, any information that can be obtained off social media is ripe for use in attack, I suppose.
Yeah, I'd agree with that, Hilton. You know, it is typically for kind of knowledge, information gathering, like as a bad actor. And, you know, from my team, we do a red teaming and attacks on organizations, which simulates an attack from a bad actor, let's say, and can use anything. So our starting point would be to gather information. We would gather information by going to LinkedIn profiles of the people working in the organization, their social media, any details we can gather about those users, because, you know, we want to target them better. If we're going to continue with a phishing email, that, you know, we want to know something about them that we can add to that email that makes it more believable, let's say. And then we'd probably follow on with phishing emails. And I suppose one comes to mind that I know of one attack that I was involved in that emanated from social media. There was a guy's LinkedIn account was breached, and the attacker sent a message to his CEO saying, you know, God, you know, I'm having a bit of a problem with this transaction, and, you know, I need X amount of money. I'll follow up with an email. He had the email account as well. So, you know, obviously the CEO, it came from LinkedIn, is so believable. You know, it's your man's profile. You're not to see here. It was followed up with an email from the corporate. You know, so he transacted the money and lost it. So, you know, there are individual hacks such as that, like, happening as well, you know.
Interesting. Okay, thanks both. Declan, another question for you. Would the use of immutable storage, albeit connected, negate the tape backups, i.e. offsite backups?
I would always be conservative, I suppose. You know, so I like immutable backups, air gapping, all that kind of stuff. Everything that data resilience does for you and those solutions does for you is absolutely brilliant. But being like, you know, from, I suppose, from my time in the military, we'd have plan A, plan B, plan C, and we'd always have a backup for the backup for the backup. So I'd always have that, you know, definite endpoint that I could go back to, you know, if all else fails. Like, in a sense, everything that's connected in some way, there is a potential for bad actors because it's business. may be able to in time understand how we can get past that air gap for certain solutions, let's say. So there is a threat there that possibly, there's not, it's not 100% sure that something that's connected can't be compromised. So certainly a backup tape, although it's slow, although it's going to be, it's kind of your insurance policy against everything else fails. We can go back to that tape. Having said that, tapes deteriorate. I've seen people who had huge tape libraries sitting in, supposedly secure storage with good environmental controls, and the tapes were completely deteriorated and didn't work. And typically, it probably, if you didn't test your backups and they're connected, you're certainly not going to test your backups if they're on tape, because the effort to try get the tape, bring it back, mount it, extract the data, make sure it works, make sure you have the right tape reader and the right version of firmware and all on tape reader, which had been updated over time, but you put those tapes away 3 years ago, let's say, and you never touched them since then. So I've yet to see somebody who tested their tape backups in the past. I suppose that's why they all moved online. But then there is that threat online. Absolutely, immutable backups are brilliant. But like any connected system, they need to be protected up on an ongoing basis. Maybe Hilton, you might have some thoughts on that.
Yeah, I think that at the end of the day, it kind of, I suppose, does come down to the business's plan, where there is one in place, as to what data needs to be restored and how quickly. You may be in a situation because of your RTO and your RPO where tape just isn't an option purely because of the times involved. But exactly as you say, especially for highly regulated businesses or businesses with a lot of sensitive data, having a plan B or a plan C of a tape that is not counting degradation is impossible to compromise is a very good place to start. However, tape is probably not these days, from a technology perspective, the very first layer of backup that I think we would recommend.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it'd be just an overall fail-safe of absolutely, the big button everywhere smashes and you can't do anything else. This is something I can put my hands on and know
Yes.
I've got my backup.
Yes.
Okay, time for one more question, I think. So Hilton, I'll come to you. Does being a client of Echo mean that we are protected under their data resilience policy, or is this something we need to think about independently?
Save the complex questions for the end, huh? Nice. So, and I'm going to steal the tenant of something like ISO 27001 here, partly for this answer, in that as a business, you can't abdicate responsibility for elements of your security, operations, business continuity, etc. So the short answer, for many reasons, is it's something that each business needs to think about themselves. And the reasons for that are your service provider, be it Echo, be it the likes of Microsoft or Google, or your ISP, whatever the case may be, does not necessarily know the full extent of your operations, your systems, your data. They might not have access to them. Having said that, I would expect any client or business that thinks about their data resilience internally to at least propagate some of their requirements to their service providers contractually or through SLAs. So although you're not fully abdicating your responsibility, you are passing some of that responsibility on to your service provider. So in the example of Echo, for example, being if we talk about something like a cloud hosting service or a data center hosting service, our resiliency plan would cover that hardware layer of being able to provide that service, but not something like the resilience of your virtual machines, for example, or the data on them, unless that was a specific backup service that you took from us, if you see where I'm going with. It's a very complex question to answer in a short time because it depends on a lot of factors, but it is something that, as point one, businesses would need to think about the scope thereof independently and see what all their service providers have in place to support that.
Yeah, I suppose having a conversation with Echo or whichever service provider you have, and understand what is, what is available on the SLA, what is exactly what you need, and I suppose communicating to them what your business requirements are. So making sure they're all aligned and you understand exactly what you're getting from that service, and what are the requirements from yourselves for that service and your responsibilities.
Good answers. Okay, look, so we don't want to take up too much more of your time. We have had a couple more questions come in, but we will go back to people directly on those. Thank you to our speakers today, and thank you to everyone that's attended. You'll all be sent a recording of this webinar, so keep an eye out for that, and enjoy the rest of your days.
Thank you very much, everyone.
Thank you, Paige. Thank you, everybody, for attending.
Thanks, Paige.